Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of Education, our series focusing on various topics affecting the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Today, we're actually talking and focusing on Black History Month because February is Black History Month and celebrating the achievements and contributions of African Americans on the central role they have in U.S. history. But because we have such an intertwined relationships and dynamics with the Asian American population in this country as well, I think it's really important to bring kind of these two groups together, talking about what we have that are similar in terms of struggles that we faced over the years, and also that we're going through today with so many different events and situations and things we're dealing with, especially in just the past year with the BLM movement, attacks and discriminations on Asian Americans, especially in the past few months, just been really disturbing. So I think it's important to bring our two groups together to talk about our different perspectives and share, why this concept of diversity is just changing and why it's so important to bring up and talk about these issues between us. So I have two very special guests joining me today. We have Erika Washington. She's the executive director of Make It Work Nevada and Make It Work Education Fund. This organization has organized Black women and their families around the important economic, racial, and reproductive justice issues, which will have long-term impact, as you know, in the state of Nevada. We also have with us today Mark Padoongpatt. He's the Associate Professor of Asian Studies and Interdisciplinary Studies at UNLV. He's also a published author. His book, Flavors of Empire, Food and Making of Thai America, explains how Thai food have shaped the Thai American experience identity in this country since World War II. So two very accomplished individuals based right here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you so much for joining me today on this show. Erika, I'm going to start with you. It's Black History Month, right? We've been, that term we've heard I've heard it over the years, but right now I think it's more important than ever, as I said, to kind of focus on the fact that it's not just Black and white America anymore, right? We have such a diverse population here. And I think it's important for communities to come together, support. But for you, what are you seeing right now? We hear so many issues, but when it comes to diversity, just embracing the diversity and challenges that society is going through with that, what's kind of been top of mind for you, especially this month for Black History Month?
Sure. So, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here to have this conversation. I think it's going to be great. When I think of Black History Month, what I think about is it's an opportunity and a time for folks who are not Black to be able to dive in and learn some things they may not have gotten in school, because I think a lot of folks may have gotten the same education about the same, few folks who did a lot for this country and for the world. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, folks like that who all deserve great honors. But there are so many other folks, both past and present, that are just really out here trying to better their communities and better the entire United States. And I think that this gives us that opportunity to be able to showcase that. And then for Black folks, I think it's just a great time for us to celebrate, and feel good about who we are and how far we've come, and have a moment to hopefully be able to take a breath and say, yes, we are more than what people see on television. We are more than the tropes, and we're also more than, the stereotypes. So being able to just celebrate being Black, because I think that is important, but then also making sure that other folks have an opportunity to see what great things Black folks have contributed to the world so far.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to highlight. I know we have, times dedicated to the Asian American experience as well. And Mark, I want to bring you into the conversation here because I think you grew up in Southern California, right? Where you grew up in a very diverse community, but also a community that has been impacted by issues of race, especially that long, complicated history when it comes to African Americans and Asians, especially, you think back to like Rodney King riots, for example, the time when we were kids and growing up. So talk to us about that experience of growing up as an Asian American, Thai American in Southern California, and that concept of African Americans and the Black experience. And I'll have you unmute yourself for me too.
Yes, absolutely. incredibly grateful to be in conversation with you both and with Erika. And so I just wanted to say that, and also that I'm offering one kind of purview for Asian Americans, but certainly not representative of the Asian American community. But for me, growing up in Los Angeles as a Thai American, and I grew up in a working class suburb of mostly Latinx immigrants, but also other people of color. And so for me, growing up in LA, you grew up around this kind of multiracial, multi-ethnic context, and whiteness was sort of and white people were sort of on the margins, at least in my community. And that, I think, informed how I saw the world and why I sort of embraced ethnic studies when I got to the University of Oregon as an undergrad. And so I think just growing up around a multiracial, multi-ethnic neighborhood, I think I could have gone two ways. I think I could have sort of seen the world as this kind of colorblind place where race didn't matter. But instead, I felt like there was something about why we were all together and why there was fewer white people in our neighborhoods, but then they seem to dominate everywhere else in the United States. And so I think that really shaped who I am and who I became as a scholar.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because, we were talking about the perception, worldview of how, especially growing up in a certain community. And, as a journalist, I was a journalist for many years. And I think, looking back, a lot of times, what we do, the work we put out there, white is kind of the status quo, right? And we identify all these other different races, African Americans, Asian Americans. And I think it's so important now that we're being more sensitive and aware that it's not, that white is not the status quo. We need to bring the perceptions and elevate the perspectives from many different groups. And that's why I think it's important for you both to be represented here. And Erika, tell me about your experience growing up. Were you exposed to a lot of Asian Americans in your youth growing up in school? What was kind of your experience?
So I grew up in Detroit. So I grew up in a very Black area. And so it was almost a culture shock coming to Las Vegas, because then I didn't know where Black people were. I couldn't find them. But Detroit is also home to one of the largest Arabic communities outside of the Middle East. There aren't as many Asian folks. I did go to school with quite a few Hmong folk. And I remember thinking specifically when I met them, I was a young woman named Pa Yang, and I wish I could find her. I don't know where she went off to after high school. But I just remember thinking, what is Hmong? I didn't know what that was. And I was so interested, like just really that natural curiosity of being a young person. And I think a lot of folks have that. And when you're young, it's that time, because then you can ask all the questions, and we're a little less inhibited about such things. And we're just like, tell me about what you eat, and tell me about your language, and why does it sound like this? And I remember just being naturally curious. And I think that what happens, when you grow up in different pockets and areas, when you're not around that and you don't get to see it, and you become a full adult and you didn't have a chance to explore that, is when sometimes folks start thinking about minorities. Because then I never looked at myself as a minority. I still don't look at myself as a minority, because I didn't grow up that way. And, anybody else who wasn't Black, I didn't look at them as minorities either. We were just people, not colorblind by any stretch of the imagination, but just different. And I want to learn about that. And I want to know what's happening over there. And I feel like there's not enough of that in other pockets, in other places, which is how some folks start to feel othered, or they start to feel like I am a minority, or, white is the majority, where I didn't grow up thinking white was the majority, because I didn't really see them on a regular basis. And so, besides on television, like that's a different conversation around, representation that way. But, there were so many different types of folks that stood out because they were in their communities and they did speak the various languages, but they were not. And so it wasn't a melting pot either, because it was very much where you can see it and you can see the differences. But it was interesting, and it made, I think, the community and just the entire Metro Detroit area, for me, it made it better, as far as being able to find good food and all of that for, from certain places, it just, that felt like home. It still feels like home to me.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point. And Mark, you can touch on this a little bit, just about how, like you said, like Erika was saying, because she didn't know many Asians growing up, it becomes this kind of monolithic group, right? Like you see as Asian Americans, it's like Hmong, or what is Hmong? You know, so there's different groups where us as Asians or Asian Americans, we see that, you know, there are differences within our community groups where other people might not see. So like, you know, as you were growing up, Mark, were you just kind of gaining that interest of wanting to explain to people that there are different groups and there's such a diversity within our groups that kind of led you to what you're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is a great question, because I think most people don't really know this about me and my work and how I even came to studying Thai Americans. But I actually, you know, really struggled, and I think this is familiar. You know, I really struggled with my Thai American identity growing up. You know, as a teenager, coming of age, felt like, you know, wasn't really Thai enough for my family, and wasn't really American enough for anybody else. And I think that's a kind of typical story for a lot of children of immigrants growing up in the United States. And in this way, I sort of gravitated to Blackness because I was darker skinned. My nickname in my family was Ink because I was so dark.
Right.
And so I felt like, where was I going to go, you know, even at a young age, like where would I go to find kind of positive representations or positive associations with darker skin? And so I really gravitated towards, you know, what I imagined as Blackness, right? Like hip hop, R&B, gangster rap, basketball. And that was really my early kind of identity formation. And I think, you know, a very kind of fast forward, you know, to my work, I think my work came through studying Black history. And so I think that's a lot of that's what, you know, how it sort of shaped in Black history and Black study, African American history, completely changed my life. And I don't think that's an understatement, because it really allowed me to explore my own identity. It allowed me to understand race in the United States and understand the neighborhood that I grew up in and why there were few white people, and yet, you know, we were still all kind of, you know, in this working class neighborhood together. And so, you know, I think that it's something that, you know, my own identity growing up around other people of color, but being Asian, not necessarily being seen as Thai, I think really shaped who I became and how I saw myself and how I still see myself.
Yeah, and I moved to this country when I was going to college from Thailand, you know, and growing up in Thailand, I didn't know as many African Americans. So it's always been kind of a group that's not as familiar to me, you know, so that was kind of my experience coming. But like Erika was saying, what I see in the media is the representation of what I saw as African Americans, you know, and I didn't see the difference between Africans in Africa. And then, you know, so it depends on how you grew up, where you grew up, you know, and I think it's just really interesting perspectives hearing from Mark, who grew up here. He's Thai, but he grew up here in the US, right? And I'm Thai, but I was born in Thailand, but I came here later. So it's interesting. But I think this idea of model minority, you know, just Asians being seen as, you know, the successful, hardworking, and, you know, not having that struggle because of our background is just, you know, it's problematic in many ways. And it creates sometimes that, you know, drives that differences, I think, between our African American and Asian Americans. I mean, Erika, how do you see that? Like when people say, you know, Asian Americans are the model minority compared to other groups. I mean, is that something that has come, you know, thought about, or have you come to talk to people about that issue?
You know, I think growing up, a lot of times we all fall into that that idea, and I think that comes from the idea of Asians being smarter than everyone else. And you know, I have a friend, her name is Ling Ling, and she's always like, "Oh, that's so not true. I wish people would stop doing that," or what have you. And she sort of jokes about it, but we had like a really, I think, in-depth conversation once. And honestly, what I came from that conversation really just comes down to colonization, and it comes down to, I think, and I am not an immigrant, and so, but what I have noticed from folks who have immigrated into this country and have had that idea of like what American exceptionalism is and what it means to have this, the American dream and all of that. But a part of that American dream is having somebody to have your foot on their neck. And like, so who are the bad people? Who are the ones who are lazy? Who's this? Who's that? And it's different for different groups, And so, I think, and it still boggles my mind how we can grow up in pockets where there aren't really a lot of Caucasian folks around, and it's still ingrained in us that lighter is better, that certain people are smarter, that of course the darker you are, there's something wrong with you, and that goes across all lines. That's Black, that's Asian, that's South Asian, Indian folks, like, and then there's all these skin bleaching things to make you lighter because somehow or another that's supposed to be better. And we're comparing ourselves to something that we're not, when, we spend all of this time trying to achieve this American dream, trying to achieve this version of something, whatever that is. And when that happens, I think it's just a natural way to try to pigeonhole other people. Well, those folks do that because that's who they are, because someone fed us that line. And not to say there are super smart Asian people and there are super smart Black people, and there are some that are not that bright, of all different shades and what have you. And so, and everybody probably has one in their family and all of that. And it's like, yeah, no, you didn't make the cut for that, but at the same time, I can imagine that can be really difficult, especially if you're not a math genius, because that's, a part of that Asian stereotype that you're, really smart in math and or whatever. And so when you're not, how that makes you feel growing up. So I think the same sometimes I think with Black folks, might be athleticism. And so if you're not an athlete, or you're not really strong or something, then, then you're not good enough or whatever. And so there's all these things, but all these things come from colonization. It doesn't come from who we are within, and it doesn't come from us putting that on. Black folks didn't do that to Asian folks and say that you are the smart ones and whatever. And they didn't vice versa do that to us about athleticism or anything else. And so, but we've carried it with us, and we've believed it, and we keep believing these lines because someone sold us a bill of goods that was worth nothing. And I think that that's how we lead into, the animosity between different groups, Latinx groups, and all of them, together. I think that because we were fed lines, and people who were able to come to this country of their own free will, had decided that, oh, well, there must be something wrong with Black folks if they have been here all this time and haven't been able to make it, without putting in all of the complications from the time that we were brought here, until now, over and over and over again. And so, and then people don't spend enough time talking about the internment camps. They don't spend enough time talking about any of the things that have happened over the year, because one thing America is very good at is Cajun folks, for various reasons. But we don't spend our time talking about it in a way that makes sense to say, oh, this might be why people feel or act this way. And so I think overall, another good reason why it's great that we have Black History Month, and that we have, Asian American History Month and all of that, is so that we can spend time undoing the things, and that we can spend time also learning about the things that we were never taught, because an American history book does not have all of the facts. It doesn't have a quarter of the facts of things that have actually happened. And so we need those stories and those voices and those events that are never written down in a way consumable for everyone, so that we can remove some of these really weird and ridiculous tropes.
And the work that you're doing, Mark, I think it's so important. I want you to talk and touch more on that a little bit too.
Yeah. I just wanted to jump in because I think what Erika just laid out there, so brilliant and so generative, that it made me think of, two things that I just wanted to add to that. In terms of the model minority, I mean, Erika hit it right on the head, right? This idea and this concept, I think within Asian America, we have to also get over the fact that like this is just a stereotype that's about us and it's harmful to us. I think that's obviously true, but that idea has always been in relation to Blackness, which is why I think it's important that we don't necessarily, always just talk about the model minority as something that's applied to Asians. Any positive association that people give me or say that, attribute to me because I'm Asian American, I take cautiously because I know that that's a comment on Black and brown people, right? So I've always had this kind of weird relationship that any compliment or any, wow, you're so smart. Wow, how have you done this? Wow, I take that as a, let's be cautious because I think you're thinking about somebody else when you're saying this. So being Asian American, being linked to the model minority, it's not true. For especially when we start to think about different Asian American groups, but it's also always an anti-Black sentiment, right? The model minority is to blame Black folks for not being able to make it in this country the way that Asian Americans have, and so I think that's something to always keep at the forefront is to always challenge that and think about how our identities. It's not just comparing and contrasting, right? It's not just like, well, we go through this and this goes through this. We're actually connected. And so the things that we go through as Asian Americans and how we're talked about and how we're perceived is actually directly related to how others are seen and perceived. And I think that's important to understand too. And then the other thing that Erika started digging into was the importance of addressing kind of structural issues. And that's, another important reason why I think we should, really dive into Black history and center Black history, because, I think you have to start from the premise that if you look at the world around you and you see racial inequality, I mean, just look at where people are living in neighborhoods, right? And you can really go two ways. One is either something is wrong with those people individually or culturally or whatever, which is racism. By definition, there's something deficient within them that's preventing them from being from achieving or success, or there's something going on that's creating that. And I've devoted my life, and I think that energy should be spent, as Erika said, thinking about, well, what are those things that are creating this? And so I think that's just what I wanted to add.
No, and I think it's so important. And, we're talking about perception and worldview, and part of one of the work that I'm doing is like helping journalists kind of change their kind of perception of who they're reaching out to, right? Who do they put in the media? Who do they put in their stories? Whose narratives are we telling? And a lot of times, like, we go to certain neighborhoods just to cover certain types of stories, right? And we ignore those neighborhoods when we're talking about other types of stories. And I think those things have to change, especially in the world of journalism, so that people can, because most people have never been to those neighborhoods. They don't know anything about those people. So they're getting that information from what people are putting on TV, right? The stories we're seeing in the news. So what we're putting out there, we need to be a lot more responsible as journalists. But I think all of us, in what we're all kind of citizen journalists in a way, right? We have social media, we have all these things that we're putting stories and our perspectives on, that we need to kind of really be more mindful about what kind of narratives we're putting out there about different groups. And I just wanted to maybe have you guys talk about just what's been happening, the current events that have been happening. Obviously, we're seeing, Black Lives movements and Black Lives Matter, and all the recent attacks on Asian Americans, and how our two groups can help support each other, because we've seen conflicts between the two groups when it comes to both these issues. So Erika, what's kind of been your top of mind? I mean, just seeing this trend and what's happening, these blatant attacks, from on Asian Americans, and sometimes at the hands of African Americans, and sometimes that catches a lot of people by surprise. Like, aren't we supposed to be partners? Are we supposed to help each other? So what's happening there in your perspective?
I think, I think no one is, everyone has the ability to do bad things, right? And so no one's not susceptible to being a bigot thoughts around another group and making assumptions. So, and so whether they're Black or any other race. And so I think it goes back to what I said earlier about everyone in their pockets, in their communities, in their groups, whatever that is. If it's Black folks and they're struggling and they're trying to figure out, why they're struggling and what's going on, people hurt the people that are closest to them. And so more than likely, if there are Asian folks within that community too, and they're looking, to blame somebody, that might be the reason for such things. The same way if it was Latinx or that can go in any direction. So crime is always usually, people closest to you. No one's traveling, well, the insurrectionists, they traveled, but others not necessarily traveling so far to cause harm or violence. And I think that, again, we have to get back down to the reasons why people feel the way they feel. They feel that way not because probably some Asian person literally did something to them. Like, it could be an actual beef between two people and they just happen to be of a different background. But, in the broader sense of things, more than likely, it comes from colonization. It comes from being brainwashed into assuming that somebody else is the reason why you have the issues that you have. And, that goes for white folks too. That goes for, Latinx folks too. Like, anti-Blackness is everywhere. But then also, Black folks they also blame other people for issues as well. And we seem to turn our focus to the people closest to us instead of the bigger picture of like who is actually at fault to this, who has really caused the most harm. Probably because it feels harder to be able to attack that. And how do you attack that? And I don't mean attack necessarily in a violent way, but just how do you actually break down the pillars of structural racism and white supremacy? How do you really break that down? Any way you look at it, it feels like you're trying to take a bite out of an elephant. And so not being able to do that, sometimes we start shadow boxing and we start pushing at the people who are nearest to us. And so, it's always disheartening to see us turn on other, melanin infused people. But I think that, we only thing we can do is to just continue to educate ourselves and educate our children on, where the actual problems lie. And then also, I think when it goes back to even thinking about like the model minority thing of making sure when newer folks are coming to this country, it's like, yeah, that's not true. Like, this is not what it is. Like, this is what you were able to see via whether it's television, internet, newspapers, whatever, and your idea of what the United States is like. But that's not necessarily factual, because people will see what they want to see, and then they'll also only see what, is fed to them through various outlets. So I think that, it's frustrating. It's completely frustrating. And there's plenty of solidarity between the communities, but there's certainly not enough of it. And I think that, if we start to look at like some of our similarities and things, I was just telling a friend the other night, I said, I don't know any Black person who doesn't respect their elders and doesn't put their elders first. And they get to eat first, they speak first at events, all of that. And that's the same as the Asian community. Like, we know better. There are just things that we just do not do. And we also don't wear our shoes in the house. So there's that. So we're not tracking it. There's just too many, these are small little things, but at the same time, these are things that matter. And these are things that we look at as a part of like our moral fabric of things that this is how we behave. These are things that we do and do not do. You can find the toughest gangster. They're not about to say, I say grandma. That's just not what's happening.
And so, Mark, I'm sure you agree with whatever she's saying. I mean, you've gone through similar experiences growing up, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I was about to say the shoe thing. And, of course, the funny thing, maybe sad, funny thing is that, we're the ones that are seen as the dirtiest, right? Or we're the ones that are seen as the diseased, dirty population, but we keep our shoes off in the house. But yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Erika said. It's, and to say the word frustrated just matched kind of how I was feeling. It's frustrating. I'm saddened, I'm disheartened. Even though I know that, we have a basis for solidarity, it still frustrating to see the anti-Blackness emerge from Asian American communities, especially when we discover that the perpetrator of that violence is Black or brown. And specifically, if they're Black, it's kind of like we resort to, it's been difficult at a personal level. It's also been difficult for me to really rally behind anti-Asian violence because I'm trying to figure out what exactly that means. And I've seen Asian American groups say, when a Thai elder, Vicha, in San Francisco was recently murdered, they're like, justice for Vicha. And to me, the first question is, what justice? What does justice look like?
Yeah.
I can assure you that the justice system is going to penalize and criminalize and deliver justice to the fullest extent of the law to this young Black man. I can guarantee that there has been no mismanagement of justice there, and there will not be, because we know that to be true historically. And so then the question is, what does justice look like? And that's what I think Erika is also getting at, is can we think about justice in terms of better communities, services for communities, access to healthcare? This is the other piece of the pandemic violence, because this is related to the pandemic, right? Like anti-Asian violence, but this is the other piece. It's not just this interpersonal violence and physical attacks, but also the fact that Asian Americans are also suffering from, COVID because of access to healthcare, which is a problem that affects all of us, right? Which affects all marginalized communities. That's where the basis of, I think, the work and important work needs to happen. But it's more difficult than just saying we need to arrest those people, we need to get them off the street. To really think about how do we build better communities so these things don't happen, right? So we can minimize these types of interactions. I think it is challenging, but I think it's the one that takes more important work to do.
Right. And you were mentioning the pandemic and how, we're seeing the work that ACDC, for example, is doing, people needing help, whether it be food or healthcare. So many Asian Americans that we think, oh, they're not affected. They don't need as much help as other groups, but that's just not true. But that's the misconception, right? And that's this model minority that we don't need the help, which, we see that that's not a fact when we have food drives. Asian Americans line the block to, they need that help as well as other groups. So I think I'm seeing the theme from both of you here that, I think education is key, and talking about this and getting it out in the open, especially when you're talking about the similarities between our two groups that don't get brought up as often, and to just build that solidarity. So Erika, the final thought for you in terms of just looking at this issue and moving forward, with your work and your community, especially reaching out and branching out to Asian American community, what do you want to say?
Let's do more of it. Let's figure out what is possible. And it doesn't have to be because it's Black History Month or it's Chinese New Year or anything like that, but just because, like, sit down and let's go through like all of the issues that we're having. Childcare costs too much. Minimum wage is minimum. It's way too low. We have, people have a lack of paid sick days and paid sick time to be able to take care of themselves and take care of their family, which goes back to that being so important to our communities, being able to take care of those that we love and being able to take that time off to be able to do that, and having that freedom to do that without fear of losing their job. We're working on some Medicaid coverage bills around covering doulas and such, so that people can have someone they trust near them to help advocate for them through their birthing experience, because women are dying in childbirth when it's not necessary. And it's on such a rise here in the United States. I think that, we need to celebrate our differences and the uniqueness of our names. Many people don't. My middle name is Japanese. It's Yoshiko. And I remember growing up and people, and I would tell people all the time what my middle name was. And they, and then I would get made fun of. I mean, they call me Oshkosh Bagosh, which was, the overalls people used to wear or whatever. And And then I found an author named Yoshiko. I think it's Yoshiko Euclida, I think is her name.
Mm.
And she was in a book of mine from elementary school. And then I was just so fascinated from there that there was somebody else named Yoshiko. And then that's a whole nother story about how, you know, my smidget of Asian that is somewhere in my family. But, you know, but that is, you know, a part of who I am too. And, you know, and being able to be proud of it, being able to be proud of having multiple syllables in your name and not shortening your name for someone or for Americans or whatever, because it's too much for them. There's enough room in our mouths to say all of the syllables and to keep getting it right. And if I'm ever getting it wrong, to correct me over and over again until I get it right, because that's a part of who you are and respect. And I think, you know, us having that own pride for that and not, you know, allowing people to shorten our experiences, including our names, is really important. And I think that is easily understood in the individual communities of color. And so if we can collectively join together, we are not the minority, you know, if we were collective at all. And, you know, we all make the best food. We know how to use spices correctly and all of that. So I think that, you know, if we just put our minds to it, you know, we are the ones that we've been waiting for.
Well, talking about getting food to unite all of us, Mark knows this well, especially with his book. You know,
yes, I would like that book. Actually, I'm going to make sure I get that book.
So, Mark, final thought from you. I know, you know, food is a uniter, but we definitely need more than that to create this true solidarity and partnership, right, between our two groups.
Yeah, so many thoughts. Solidarity, collective mobilization, finding ways, finding common ground. And I don't, you know, I mean, in addition to everything we've been talking about in terms of food and, you know, cultural practices, but also like colonization impacted all of us. Racism has impacted all of us. Sexism has impacted all of us. Think about these larger conditions that have had impact on our communities, albeit very different. But if we can find ways to say, you know what, we all work. A lot of us work in restaurants. Maybe we should, and as servers, maybe that's a point of building solidarity and to find those opportunities to build that solidarity. And I think for the Asian American community specifically, you know, I think we have, at least what I've always considered, an ethical obligation to the Black community and to Black folk, because throughout history, they've sort of presented, and the movements have presented the widest, most expansive vision of freedom in this country, and to our benefit. And I think that everything that Blackness and Black culture has contributed to the United States and to the world, from, I mean, the spectrum is large, right? From sports to art to music, this is our price of admission. Like, if we're going to, right, like this is the least we can do, is support movements for Black freedom and try to root out anti-Blackness within our community, given all the things that Black people have contributed to the world and have done for, I shouldn't say done specifically for, but have laid the path for marginalized communities to exist. So that's my final thought. One of many. This was so
we can continue talking about this, I'm sure, for hours, you know, but it's so important to create a start of this. I hope this is just the start of conversation for us. And thank you to you both, to Erika Washington and Mark Padoongpatt, for joining me on this conversation as we become partners in this movement to just create more understanding, right, and education among all our different groups, so we can get this out in the open and talk about it and ask, why is this happening, and how can we find a solution together to promote more diversity and true, authentic allyship between all of our groups. So thank you again to both Erika and Mark for this conversation, and thank you for all of you for watching this show. And please share it on Facebook, on social media. We want this to be a positive thing to spread for both our groups. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you on the next episode of EducAsian.
Thank you.